So is Uber still a good side hustle in 2025? Let's break it down. So I moved back to Sydney last year, and one of the first things I did was get a driver's license, and I had a full-time job when I arrived. And I stayed at that job for about 3 months until I realized I hated it, and I switched to actually one of our clients. But when I switched to the client, they had me on casual instead of full-time. And so I had this sort of like, I'd like to have a car, especially since I have an assistance dog and he can go on the bus with me every day, but I have to take 2 buses and it's a pain with him. So, and it's also cold and hot and it wasn't the greatest experience. And every time that we're in an Uber, the driver keeps saying that they rent a vehicle because they don't want to use their own car for Uber because, it puts mileage and wear and tear. And so everybody keeps talking about like you rent a vehicle to use for Uber. And I initially looked at just buying a cheap car and I ended up it was a little Mini Cooper, and I bought it and it broke down before I got to the highway. Thankfully, they took it back, and so then I was without car again. So I was like, well, if I rent a car through Uber, maybe I can have a car to drive to work, and I'll just Uber enough to pay for the vehicle. And you get really nice cars. Like, they are brand new, but they're not cheap. But you're like, it's fine. I can Uber enough to pay for it, and then, I can Uber a little more and, actually make side money. Now, more than actually making side cash, my biggest thing was, just to pay for the car. And in order to pay for the car, I had to drive well over 10 hours a week. And right at the time that I eventually got this Uber vehicle, my boss made me full-time. And I went from working randomly, like I could do 40 hours one week, 22 the next. And literally the week I got the car, they put me on full-time. So I was no longer really needing to make or had time to do a bunch of extra hours. So I was kind of limited now to how many hours I could Uber, because now I'm working 40 hours a week. I don't really want to drive 20 hours a week with Uber, especially since the dog is in the vehicle with me. Now, I will say, having the dog in the car with me, I got a little center console bed and he sat in the center console, and everybody who got in the car was immediately like, oh my God, you have a dog. Immediate 5 stars. And I have a 5-star rating because of Teddy. But the car was costing me $380 a week, Australian, to rent a vehicle. And I had wanted a Smart, and they didn't have one because I wanted the Smart one. And I ended up with the BYD. And I didn't like it. It was like driving a potato. And then eventually I got sideswiped in the city. So that was a $1,500 deductible, even though it wasn't my fault. And we're still arguing over whether I'm going to get that money back. So then as I took that one back, I saw the Smart 3s and I'm like, what about those? And they were like, yeah. And I'm like, there's a yellow one. And apparently nobody wanted the yellow one. So they gave it to me at a pretty good price. But I was like, hey, up the insurance. So if I get hit again, it's $500 instead of $1,500, because $1,500 hurt. Now, realistically, in Sydney, you might earn between $30 and $40 an hour Ubering, but that's before you pay any expenses, right? That's gross. Now, I had an electric vehicle, so it was much cheaper to fill, but it was still $380 a week, which meant I had to drive like 15 hours just to cover the cost of the vehicle. And if I wanted to make extra, that meant that my weekends now, my time off, I am fully driving in order to make it up. But I also do a lot of overtime at work, and now I have started taking classes again on Wednesday, which means there's a whole day that I am not driving. And I also try really hard to give my dog a complete day off. So either Saturday or Sunday, we do nothing. We just sit on the couch and do nothing, because he works really hard all week. As an assistance dog, it's important for him to have time off. Now, Uber does suck you in with like the first couple weeks. They have all of these things where like if you do a certain amount of drives and you get bonuses. So there was like $1,000 bonus up the front, which did help cover the initial costs of the car, like the deposit and everything, which was great. But then my husband and my in-laws came to visit and I wasn't gonna drive while they were here. That is also when somebody hit me in the city. And so when I was not driving, that was almost $400 a week because I have tolls and I have, electricity or gas for a vehicle. So it was well over $400 a week if you're not driving it to have a nice car that you could drive. Eventually though, I realized that the whole point of having the car and Ubering was so that I could have a car to go to work and then I would just drive a little bit to pay for the car. But I realized I'm not driving a little bit to pay for the car. I am driving a lot and now I have no spare time. And if you're one of those people that enjoys the full hustle culture and not having time off, maybe it's great for you, but it did not work for me. So my bank wouldn't give me a loan because I was like, let me just get a little tiny $5,000 fiat or something. And they wouldn't give me one. So then finally I kept seeing these ads for one of those conglomerates where they find the loans for you. And they were like, yeah, we can get you approved for at least $15,000, which is only a $90 a week repayment. And then, so I started looking for cars and I made sure to keep the list of Uber vehicles, and every time I looked at different kind of cars, I checked the Uber list to make sure that, it was at least Uber-exable. And then last week I found it was a Suzuki Ignis. It was a 2023. It was the demo showroom model. So it only had 2,500 kilometers on it and they wanted 19 grand for it. And I double checked the list on Uber and it said Suzuki Ignis was Uber-exable. So I'm like, great. Let me purchase this vehicle. And they were like, we'll pay for the whole thing. And so with on-road costs and everything, it was $20,000. I put down $1,000 deposit and a $19,000 loan, which is great. And my payments are $99 a week, which is way more manageable than the $380 I was paying. Now, I have to get special insurance in order to ride share. So I was looking at insurance and the vehicle, just comprehensive insurance was, $1,400. But depending on which company you want, if you're gonna use the vehicle as a ride share, it could be $4,000 a year for insurance. That's expensive. Anyway, I went through, I looked at a few different companies and yeah, UE wanted $1,400 for just comprehensive, but over $4,000 for rideshare. And eventually I found Amy and they were about the same for comprehensive, but their rideshare insurance was $2,200 a year if you were using the vehicle full time. But I called Amy and I'm like, hey, I use this vehicle to go to work. It's a private vehicle and 10 hours a week, I want a rideshare, just enough to pay for the costs of the car. And so they were like, actually, if you're just using it part-time and you're only using it for a few hours a week, we're not gonna bump up your insurance, which is amazing because, I was willing to pay the $2,200, if I was doing it full-time, but I don't wanna have to pay that kind of money to only do it as a part-time side thing, just enough to pay for the car. So it works out to be, with gas and everything, now we're looking at $150 a week for the car instead of $380, which is great, right? So I had originally looked at driving for Uber and for Diddy. And because I went through Camo, who originally I was getting the vehicle through, they automatically put everything into Uber for you. And so I never actually signed up for Diddy. I was just doing the Uber. And each time I changed vehicles, they would auto do the paperwork for me, which was great. But now I bought this car, I upload the paperwork and I'm like, hey, while I'm here, I may as well, put it into Diddy as well. So I put the paperwork up to Diddy and within half an hour, I get a notification, I am approved, my app changes to now I'm driverable. It's great, right? And I keep hearing about Diddy because they pay more of a percentage than Uber does. And then Uber comes back and they're like, yeah, your vehicle does not meet our safety ratings. And I'm like, what the fuck now? Because I specifically bought a car that was on your list of vehicles that are Uber eligible. And they're like, no, because it doesn't self-brake. And literally the thing I hated most about all the new cars was as soon as I got in, I would turn off all of the things. I would turn off the lane assist. I would turn off the auto brake. I want a car that I drive, not a car that drives me. So, you know, I bought a Suzuki, brand new, but old school. Like it has a key, an actual key that you turn, and knobs that you turn instead of like talking to it. And you drive the vehicle. But apparently now that doesn't meet safety ratings. So now I have $150 a week car that I can't Uber, but I can Diddy. And so now I guess I'll just Diddy, like really, you know, 10 hours a week, which really is like, you know, if I do like 2 hours after work every day, although I can't do it every day since I'm taking a class, but also in the weeks that I don't want to Uber, I can still afford that. It's not gonna break me. Whereas paying $380 a week for a car, a rental car to Uber, that about broke me. I'm in debt for that car. And what pisses me off is Uber listed the vehicle saying that it was Uberable. And when I contacted them, I'm like, it's on your website. They're like, yeah, no. And I'm like, there's no way to contact Uber beforehand and verify. You just have to go on their thing. And then they're like, yeah, nah. So I don't know how to check before you buy a vehicle that it is actually Uberable. And then what pissed me off even more is they're like, hey, but if you don't have a car, you can rent one. So I think Uber is in like cahoots with all these rental companies, and now they're just trying to get everybody to rent cars because they're probably getting a kickback. And I'm like, no, can't afford to rent a vehicle as a part-time driver. Maybe if you are driving full-time or you're doing like 30 hours a week, it might be worth it. But honestly, like at $380 a week, and that was the cheapest one, and you're making $30 an hour, and then you've got like all kinds of, you know, I mean, the rentals, it's pretty much all included. So except for tolls and electricity, so juicing the car up. But yeah, like I don't think you're actually making any money at that point having a vehicle and Ubering. And maybe with the much cheaper car, if I could Uber it, I could make money. We'll see what happens with Diddy. But really, I think I'm just gonna break even. So I think if you're looking to, you know, part-time Uber, only do it if you have a car that you don't mind putting the mileage on, that you don't mind a bunch of people getting in and constantly dirtying, but do not rent a vehicle to do part-time ride sharing. You're probably better off doing the $25 a week for a bike and just doing the Uber Eats at that point. But I guess I'll try Diddy. And thankfully my insurance isn't crazy expensive, and I do love the new car, even if I can't Uber it. And you know, it's so much nicer to drive to work than catch 2 buses, especially now that it's about to be 40 degrees, and this car has amazing air conditioning. But yeah, I guess I'll update in a month or so and let you know if Diddy makes any money, because everyone says that you don't get as many rides and the fares are cheaper, but you get a higher percentage. So follow along if you want to see how that goes. Anyway, what are your experiences? Have you Ubered or Diddied or whatever other rideshare program part-time and made money, or is it just like break even?